You've probably heard that truck driving is a hard life. Long hours, bad roads, time away from your family. That part gets acknowledged. That part gets the country music songs and the respectful nod. What doesn't get acknowledged is this. The average long-haul truck driver in the United States dies at roughly 61 years old. The national average for men is 76. That is not a rounding error. That is 15 years. Some analyses push it closer to 17. And most people, when they hear that number, think they already understand it. Bad food, no exercise, stress. They picture the truck stop diner at 3 in the morning, and they think, yeah, that tracks. That answer is not wrong, but it is not the real answer. It is the first layer of an answer that goes much deeper. Through federal regulations, a specific medical condition, a piece of proposed legislation, and a lobbying effort that ended with Congress invoking a procedural mechanism most Americans have never heard of to kill a rule that could have added years to the lives of 3.5 million drivers. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what that rule was, why it was killed, and what it means that the freight sitting in your refrigerator right now was delivered by someone operating under a federal safety system with a documented, deliberate, 30-year-old blind spot. Let's start with what everyone gets wrong. The lifestyle answer is real. That needs to be said first, because it would be dishonest to dismiss it. Long-haul truck drivers are approximately twice as likely to be obese as the general working population. Studies put the figure at roughly 69% of commercial drivers versus 31% nationally. They sit behind the wheel for up to 11 hours per shift. Their eating schedule is not governed by hunger or habit. It is governed by rest areas, truck stop restaurants, and whatever is still open at 2 a.m. in a small town off the interstate. Exercise is structurally not part of the job. There is nowhere to go, no time built in, and a culture that has not historically treated physical health as a professional priority. The numbers that come out of this are significant. Truck drivers average 5.18 hours of sleep per day versus the 7 to 8 hours recommended for the general workforce. Their diabetes rate runs approximately 50% higher than comparable working populations. Hypertension rates are substantially elevated. On average, studies find long-haul drivers carrying 3.3 documented health problems per person versus 1.8 for the general working population. These are not minor variations. This is a population under sustained, systemic, physiological stress. But here's the problem with stopping at the lifestyle explanation. Every physically demanding, high-stress, irregular hours occupation in America produces elevated mortality. Construction workers, miners, commercial fishermen. All of them carry shortened life expectancy relative to desk workers. The gap is real. The gap is expected. What makes long-haul trucking's gap unusual is that it is disproportionate, even within that category. 15 to 17 years is not the spread you would predict from diet and exercise alone. Something else is driving the numbers. Something that specifically intersects with the one thing long-haul truck drivers do that almost no other occupation requires: sleeping on a federally mandated schedule, inside a vehicle, while being evaluated by a medical examination system with a very specific gap at its center. But to understand that gap, you first have to understand what actually happens when a truck driver closes his eyes. The hours of service rules are federal law. Under 49 CFR, Part 395, a commercial truck driver operating in interstate commerce cannot drive more than 11 hours in a 14-hour window. After that window closes, the driver is required to take 10 consecutive hours off duty before the clock resets. This is not a suggestion. This is a federal mandate enforced by electronic logging devices, roadside inspections, and carrier compliance audits. The government built a system to make sure drivers stop and sleep. What the system did not address is whether the sleep is actually doing anything. Sleep can look like rest, but not be restorative. Obstructive sleep apnea is a condition in which the soft tissue at the back of the throat collapses repeatedly during sleep, blocking the airway. The brain, recognizing that the body is not getting enough oxygen, briefly wakes the person to restore normal breathing. This can happen dozens or hundreds of times per night. The person does not remember these awakenings. They are too brief and too shallow to register as conscious waking, but they completely destroy the restorative architecture of sleep. The driver is horizontal for the required 10 hours. He is not sleeping in any medically meaningful sense. He is suffocating slowly, and his nervous system is fighting back all night. The cardiovascular consequences are severe and extensively documented. Untreated obstructive sleep apnea is directly associated with hypertension, coronary artery disease, stroke, insulin resistance, and metabolic syndrome. Look at the list of conditions showing up in long-haul trucker mortality data: the heart disease, the hypertension, the diabetes, and what you are also looking at is a list of known downstream consequences of chronic untreated sleep apnea. These conditions are not just parallel. For a significant portion of affected drivers, they are causally linked. Now here's the thing that changes the shape of this entire story. A landmark study, published in 1995, authored by researchers at the University of Pennsylvania, formally documented the relationship between untreated sleep apnea, excessive daytime sleepiness, and commercial truck crash risk. This was not a new theory. This was documented evidence. FMCSA later commissioned its own research, which found that drivers with untreated moderate to severe obstructive sleep apnea were 2.5 times more likely to experience a serious preventable accident than drivers without the condition. The federal government has known this for 30 years. So why is there no federal requirement to screen for it? That answer, when you actually trace it through the regulatory record, is not what you would expect from an agency whose stated mission is highway safety. In March 2016, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration published a formal advance notice of proposed rulemaking, the official first step toward a federal regulation, specifically addressing sleep apnea screening for commercial drivers. The proposal was not ambitious. It was targeted. Drivers with a body mass index above 35, combined with specific clinical risk markers, would be flagged during their Department of Transportation physical and referred for sleep study evaluation. Drivers who tested positive for moderate or severe sleep apnea would be required to begin treatment, most commonly CPAP therapy, and demonstrate consistent use before their medical certificate would be issued or renewed. The logic was close to airtight. CPAP therapy, when used consistently, is highly effective. The agency's own research showed that treated drivers had crash rates statistically comparable to drivers without the condition. The problem causing the deaths was identifiable. The solution was available and affordable. The regulatory mechanism to require it was being drafted. This was, on paper, a solvable problem. In August 2017, Congress invoked the Congressional Review Act to disapprove a related Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration guidance document on sleep apnea screening. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration subsequently withdrew its rulemaking. The official procedural justification was that the guidance had been issued without completing the full notice and comment rulemaking process. The practical outcome was that no federal sleep apnea screening standard was implemented. Today, sleep apnea evaluation is at the discretion of the individual Department of Transportation medical examiner. A driver with a body mass index over 40, documented daytime sleepiness, and a neck circumference well above clinical thresholds can pass a Department of Transportation physical if the examiner does not choose to flag the risk. The examination happens every 24 months for most drivers. It checks vision, hearing, blood pressure, and gross neurological function. It does not include any standardized instrument for identifying the condition most likely to be killing them. This is worth sitting with for a moment. The condition is known. The screening tools exist. The treatment is effective. The regulatory proposal was written, published, and entered into the federal record. And then it was withdrawn. Understanding why requires understanding the economics of the industry that opposed it. The trucking industry has been in a structural driver shortage for over a decade. The American Transportation Research Institute estimated the shortage at approximately 60,000 qualified drivers in 2018, with projections suggesting growth to 160,000 by 2028. Large truckload carriers, the companies running the fleets that move most of the nation's consumer goods, experience annual driver turnover rates that average approximately 90%. Not 9%, 90%. Nearly the entire workforce is replaced every year. In this environment, a health requirement with the potential to disqualify a significant portion of existing drivers is not primarily a medical question. It is an operational threat. Sleep apnea prevalence estimates for the commercial driver population range from 28%, FMCSA's own conservative figure, to considerably higher in studies of obese and older drivers who are disproportionately represented in long-haul fleets. The American Trucking Associations estimated that compliance with the proposed screening rule would cost the industry approximately $1 billion, accounting for driver downtime, evaluation costs, and the loss of drivers who could not or would not pursue treatment. That figure carries enormous weight in a regulatory environment where the agency writing the rules is also responsible for maintaining a functional freight system. The drivers most likely to screen positive, older, higher BMI, long haul, are also among the most experienced. They know the routes, the regulations, the equipment. Removing them from service, even temporarily for evaluation and treatment, is a real operational cost. The system's built-in incentive structure points directly away from the intervention that would most benefit the people inside it. Meanwhile, the DOT physical that is supposed to serve as the gateway to driver health sits at a 2-year interval for most drivers, checking the parameters it has always checked, leaving the question of sleep quality entirely to examiner discretion. The gap between what the science says is killing these men and what the regulatory system is actually measuring has not closed in 30 years, and the freight keeps moving. So here is where you actually land after all of this. You came in thinking you understood why truck drivers die young. Hard life, bad food, the road. That part is real. But underneath it is a more specific story. A workforce carrying sleep apnea rates 2 to 3 times the general population. A federal mandate requiring them to rest, without any corresponding mandate to verify that the rest is actually restorative. A condition directly linked to heart disease, hypertension, stroke, and metabolic dysfunction, all of which appear prominently in trucker mortality data. A proposed rule, published in the Federal Register, that would have required screening for that condition, and a Congressional Review Act resolution that erased it, leaving individual examiner discretion where a federal standard was supposed to go. The 15 to 17-year gap is not a mystery. It is the accumulated cost of a system that knew what was happening, drafted the solution, and then chose, for reasons that had nothing to do with medicine, not to implement it. Next time someone tells you it's just the lifestyle, you'll know that's the first layer. Underneath it is a regulatory record that goes back to 1995, a lobbying effort measured in billions, and 3.5 million drivers still operating under a medical screening system with a documented blind spot at its center. And if you think the gap between what a federal safety agency knows and what it actually requires is unique to trucking, wait until we get into how the FAA has handled the exact same question for commercial pilots for the past 40 years.